just to let people know that the session is being recorded, although I've got a proposition that we might stop recording halfway through, but we can talk about that. And just a few other things there about the protocols that we just need to be aware of. So I thought that what I might do is just start by going over what our plan is. And I hate when there always seems to take me a while to be able to advance slides when I'm sharing on Zoom. Okay, this is a plan that we've got where we'll have a little welcome, and I've allowed 5 minutes for us not to get started on time. Then we've got 30 minutes with some examples and thoughts from Molly, Heather and Kath. I thought a 5-minute break, then 15 minutes for some responses, observations, questions, etc. from audience. And I thought that maybe when we finished that, we might stop the recording, or at least the recording would continue, but we can have it edited out. And then we can get into some writing, and we could do a brainstorm about what we, and when I say we, it's like we individually or maybe we collectively. There are maybe people who might want to try some joint writing. So we could brainstorm what we might do and then have 30 minutes of silent writing, and then spend the last 15 minutes just having some reading time and talking about, next steps, what people are interested in doing from here. So if everyone's sort of happy with that plan, we can start with just really quickly your name, if appropriate, acknowledgement of country or similar, where you're located and how you're feeling at the moment. So maybe I might stop share while we do that. So I've just got 3 things. So I might start that because it's very confusing. Apparently my name is Community Economies Institute. I'm Jenny Cameron. Hi, I am in the South Island, Te Waiponamu of Aotearoa, New Zealand, land that was originally settled by Waitaha and then Kati Māmoe, and I acknowledge the ongoing struggle of Kati Māmoe and Waitaha for recognition of their mana and their connection to the land here. And so that's where I am. How am I feeling? I'm sort of nervous, but I'm less nervous now that there aren't 20 people here. So I would like to, so when you finish your little introduction, just pass to someone. So I would like to pass to Dee.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dee. My pronouns are they, them. I'm on unceded Tewa land in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the southwest of the U.S. I'm feeling a little sheepish. I didn't realize this was a 2-hour session, so I will just be here for the first hour, but I'm grateful to be here for now. And I'll pass it on to Christian.
Right. Thanks, Dee.
I'm Christian Anderson. I'm located in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., Coast Salish, Squamish territory. And I'm feeling excited to hear what you all are going to talk about. I am technically the liaison for this session, so I will be taking notes. And if there is anything I can do to assist with the smooth operating, though I have no doubt about your capabilities, just let me know or shoot me a chat. Happy to be here. And I will pass it to Heather.
Okay, thank you, Christian. I'm Heather McLean, pronouns she, her, and I'm presenting from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. I'm in East Vancouver right now, and I'm trying to stay really grounded with what's happening with Gaza and not caught in that. So, but reading today about trade unions globally that are stopping the movement of arms, and so hopefully all kinds of solidarities are emerging. But yeah, and I'm excited to be here, but feeling quite thrown with that as the context we're working in. But why more than ever we need to create love and alternatives with each other. So I will pass the ball to Catherine.
That's me. Hi, everybody. I'm joining you from Sydney in Australia on the lands, the unceded lands of the Darug people of the Eora Nation, here on the beautiful Georges River, just behind me. And yeah, we're still suffering the after effects of a terrible national referendum where 60% of Australians rejected the idea of a voice for Aboriginal people, Indigenous people. So really feeling down for a lot of reasons, not just also the international issues that are going on. And yeah, I'm feeling a little shell-shocked. I just turned 70 yesterday, and I just got a defibrillator put in to help my heart along. So that's kind of like, whoa, that's old age with a big bang. So I'm trying to figure out what my next step is. So it's great to be speculating with you guys. All right. Thank you, Molly. I'll pass you to you.
Well, kia ora koutou. I'm in the North Island of New Zealand, of Aotearoa, Te Ika a Maui, the fish of Maui. And I'm currently hiding out in a lecture theatre underneath what is literally an ivory-coloured tower on our city campus, which known as Waipapa Taumatarau, which is the name gifted by the iwi of the area, the tribe of the area, Ngāti Whātua o Ōrākei, meaning the kind of meeting place of many peoples, which sort of sums up the spirit of the campus and also the nature of this land and its connection to many different iwi and tribes. I am feeling really overwhelmed, overwhelmed by global circumstances, but also just, gosh, this is the crunch point in semester. And then always when the university asks you for like 100 more things when you're already really busy. Now, tomorrow. So yeah, I'm so glad to be here and talking to you as a kind of respite from that madness. And I will pass to Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Johnson. I'm in my office here at the University of Victoria, which is in the unceded territories of the Lekwungen, Saanich, and Esquimalt peoples, and thinking through how am I feeling? I'm feeling vibrational in terms of thinking about the planning right now for the next semester, which involves, again, this transsystemic Indigenous law, Canadian Law Business Associations course. And so thinking about the importance of imaginaries and speculation and how to do this work of walking in multiple, how to make that not, yeah, anyways, that, so the speculative part in the work for today, I'm very, very excited to sit in that speculative space with you guys with knowledge of all of the, like, it's a gong show right now globally, right? And I will pass it to Jana.
Hi, good evening. I'm sitting in Berlin, so it's 11 p.m. It's kind of dark, and I didn't turn on the lights because everybody else is sleeping. So I might get a bit tired later. So I just go see how long I can stick with you, but I'm very excited, very curious what you're going to present and what we're going to do. And I pass it on to Ethan.
Hey everybody, good to be here with you. I'm calling from Wabanaki homelands in what is colonially called Maine, USA. And I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed. I am, my community just went through a mass shooting last week, which has been horrible, and just carrying a lot of weight of that and the world and a lot of personal things. And but yeah, so I'm kind of off camera and just trying to listen, and just really happy to be here with you all, and gonna stay as long as I can to just kind of share some space and absorb some good thinking, and I could use some speculative hopefulness also. So I appreciate y'all.
Right, thanks, Ethan. And do you want to pass to Kerry?
Yes, Carrie. Thanks.
Thanks, Ethan, Jenny. Hi, I'm Kerry, and I am here in Naarm, Melbourne, which is Wurundjeri country in Southeast Australia. And Yeah, I don't know. I was gonna say, feels like everyone's pretty overwhelmed in the room. That was the key thread that came across. Maybe I shouldn't add to that. I feel many things. So one thing that is perhaps positive is that my 10-month-old baby isn't that sick this morning and has been for the past week. So that's a positive start to the day. But I'm very interested in speculative fiction. So thanks for organizing, Jenny, and whoever else was wanting to, help to set it up. And I'm keen to hear what you have to say about it in the discussion.
Great. Thanks, Kerry. And I think we've all had a go, yes. So fantastic. Thank you so much for that, everyone. It's, great to hear about where people are at the moment and also, how people are feeling. Well, I think I'll go back to share just because I've just got a few slides of things just as a bit of scene setting that I thought might be useful to get us started. And that is thinking about this connection between speculative writing and community economies. And, that community economy is one of the things that characterizes the sort of approach we take, is always thinking about what we have at hand to work with in order to build better worlds. And as lots of us have said, the need for a better world, certainly is very strong at the moment. And that means that there's a sort of underpinning within community economies work, and I still can't get the right button to move the slide on. There. Okay, so I think it's the right arrow that's doing it. So one is this commitment that we have to seeking out new possibilities and existing examples of how things might be otherwise. And even if those things are just glimpses of what might be possible, I think in community economies work, seeking out those sorts of possibilities is really important as a sort of approach to the world. And partly to go along with that, there's the stance that we take of reading for difference, and that, almost stubborn or belligerent reading against the grain, which I guess in a world means when everything seems really terrible, trying to hold on to those possibilities where things are not so terrible. And then that commitment about thinking about how we can help to support and amplify the possibilities and examples of how things might be otherwise. And I think we do that amplification through a whole range of strategies, through our research, through our teaching. People like Heather do it through performance and so on. So I think the speculative writing fits into one of those strategies that we can use to help amplify the possibilities for how things might be otherwise in the world. And I think with that in mind about how community economies might intersect with speculative writing, I just Kath Gibson put me onto this piece by Isabel Stengers, which, and I'll show you in a moment, I've got a link to in our Google Docs for people. But when you read some of what she's writing, the parallels to the sort of community economies thinking is really strong. So she comments in this 2014 piece, which was a conference paper, on how much academic writing is tied to these seemingly insuperable dilemmas which strangle us, leave us free to denounce and debunk, certainly, but not to add reality, not to sustain what may be possible against sad probabilities. And in that context, she draws on Donna Haraway to argue for the value of science fiction and speculative fabulation as a means of showing how our world does not need to be what it is, does not need to be thought and felt as it seems to authoritatively demand. So I just think there's really nice parallels there between what she's saying and a sort of community economies way of thinking about how things might be otherwise and trying to amplify those existing possibilities. And that speculative writing, could be one of the modes that we can use for doing that work of amplification. And as we've said in the introductions, where people talking about the international context and national contexts and more local contexts, as Ethan mentioned. And Ethan also used the idea of hopefulness, that it does seem that maybe speculative writing and speculative fabulation is a really important genre for these current times. Not least of which, to give us some hope, a thread of hope to hang on to. So the background to this session is the germ of the idea actually came out of one of the summer winter school nodes. And so it was the online node in the Americas. And on the last day, we ended up in this sort of fanciful discussion about how would we redesign a taxation system to support the sort of world that we wanted. And we sort of, everybody threw in their 2 bobs worth. And we ended up with this idea that you'd have a taxation system that that would enable a single mum for her children to be able to go through school and post-school, whether post-school was university or some sort of technical training, without any sort of, financial barriers. And that as part of that journey for children, you would have a schooling system where children learnt an Indigenous language, and where there was a strong environmental education component based on working with Indigenous communities. And that reflected the interest of people who were in that school, somebody who's working on environmental education with Indigenous communities in Australia, someone who works in the Mabuchu community and is learning that language. So that was sort of inflected in that sort of fanciful discussion that we had about how the world might be otherwise and how a taxation system might be otherwise. And then, knowing there are people within the network who are doing that work already, we just thought that this might be a good opportunity to hear a little bit more about what some people who, like Molly and Heather and Kath, who have been doing a little bit of this, what they might share with us. And so they've each got 30 minutes to share. But I just want to, before that, just note that
10 minutes, haven't we?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, 10 minutes each. Sorry. No, not 30 minutes each. Thank you. In the chat, I've put a link to a Google Docs that I've set up where it's got 3 pages, and the first page is where I've started to put examples of speculative writing, and if anyone wants to add examples in there. And the first one is the Isabel Stenger's piece and a link to that piece. And then Kath drew my attention to Paul Chatterton's new book, which has got a final chapter that is a sort of speculative writing piece. But if anyone wants to add anything to that, either their own work or anything that they're familiar with about speculative writing that they think would be useful. And then we've got a couple of other pages in that document that we can come to. But how about Molly, Heather, Kath, we haven't talked about what order you want to go in. So who wants to go first? And I see some people are saying they don't have the link. I'll just put, I'll put the link in again. Yep.
I'm okay to go first unless anybody really wants to. I'm just going to time myself because I'm not rehearsed.
Okay, and I'll time too, and I will stop you at 10 minutes.
Yeah, good. Cool. So my plan was really just to talk to an article. So how I came to be part of this session was I asked Jenny to help me with the revisions, the reviewer feedback that had come on an article that I had written with some colleagues. And so I just want to acknowledge them because their work was really central to what I'm talking about. So that's Dr. Mark Harvey, who's in the Creative Arts and Industries faculty here, and and Elise Sturback, who's a doctoral student and also a really active arts advocate in Aotearoa, and Jessie Anderson, who is a master's student in public policy here. So we co-authored a paper together that was using diverse economies thinking and speculative fiction to try and get ourselves out of some of the impossibilities of rethinking cultural policy and the resourcing of arts practice in Aotearoa, so that we all connect in on that particular topic. We've all been thinking about it in different ways for different reasons for a while, and working together and separately around the sort of cultural policy, arts funding in Aotearoa. But for me, I've always used, well, pretty much always since my PhD, used diverse economies thinking and theory to help me get beyond some of the kind of dead ends of critique in that topic. So anyway, we in this article we used speculative fiction. So the way that we set up the article was that we're in a situation now where pretty much everyone agrees that the arts funding system, and here we're talking quite a lot about state funding of the arts, rather than the whole ecology of the arts funding system, is not working. So even the funders have come out publicly and said, we need a different approach, we need to do things differently. But nowhere was there any really imaginative thinking about how it could be different. So if you're looking back, which is in a previous article, we kind of looked back at the various iterations of arts funding and cultural policy. They sort of tend to recycle cultural policy ideas from the UK or Australia. And these tend to be largely kind of capitalocentric, is what we're arguing in there, or yeah, they just fail to really show any imagination or vision for what could be achieved. And so Jessie, who's one of the authors, had done some research for us where she had looked at what was to hand. So she had looked at cultural policy and arts funding of all different kinds internationally. So she'd done a bit of a literature and policy review for us and sort of dug up all these different ways in which states were resourcing the arts. And we sort of did some work breaking those down into different ideas. So we were all kind of familiar with those. But we weren't really sure how to get to the point of sort of, how do we move from knowing there's a problem, seeing that there are some alternatives and some quite radical alternatives, as well as some quite moderate alternatives. And then how do we really sort of present an idea of quite a radical reimagining, because rather than just a tinkering with what is already there. So we used speculative fiction to do that. And we, as Jenny did in the introduction to this, we really strongly aligned the kind of aims of a diverse economy approach with the methods of speculative fiction. So that sense of trying to make certain kinds of just ethical economies more possible, more real, but also acknowledging that they exist here in the present, the alternatives. It's not entirely a kind of invention out of nowhere. And so we talked about community economies as being, they're not yet to exist perfectly conceived economic utopias. They're already happening in different parts of the world, in different sectors and in different scales, that share an ongoing attention to and care for the independent livelihoods and well-being of people in the planet. So how could we think about a kind of community economies of resourcing the arts, building with some of the possibilities that we saw were to hand. So we drew on Donna Haraway, Stengers, and Sarah Truman, who's someone else who's used speculative fiction with youth. And I really like her work in sort of the context of English classrooms and elsewhere. So she's another person I can put into the Google Doc. And also with one of the doctoral graduates here, so Dr. Anne Paisley, who's used speculative fiction around trans education to kind of imagine what a sort of trans affirming schooling would look like, to kind of think about how we could use speculative fabulation to envisage what was possible for community arts economies that could grow from what was already existing. And so in the end, for the sake of the limited word count of our article, Mark and Elise wrote the speculative fictions. Elise is really informed by regenerative thinking and regenerative economies, and Mark is really informed by indigenous economies. He's a Maori scholar. So they wrote, and they're both arts practitioners as well as researchers. So they both wrote their speculative fictions, imagining possible arts futures. And actually, the thing I wanted to mention that we did before the writings, a quite a practical thing, as we sat down together to think about how we were going to begin, is actually Elise suggested that we wrote our dystopias first. And we felt quite dystopic at that moment because we'd just had a new mayor elected in Auckland who was proposing to cut all the arts and social programs that the council provided because he saw it as a unnecessary spending. And so it was a bleak moment. So we sort of wrote the dystopia of what the arts might look like here in Auckland in Tamaki Makaurau if the mayor's initial proposal had gone through. And I think articulating those dystopias helped us to then make a step towards thinking about what our more sort of hopeful futures would look like, and some of the things that we wanted to show as being possible rather than impossible. So that was just a methodological thing that we found useful. They didn't end up in the article, we'd cut them. We put in little snippets of them initially, and then in the end, we've taken them out entirely. So then, yeah, Mark wrote a speculative fiction imagining what sort of life as an artist would be like if the Maori donut economic model had been kind of implemented. So it's a Maori reinterpretation of donut economics. And then Elise imagined a kind of cultural renaissance for herself and her partner and her daughter on her daughter's 21st birthday, kind of reflecting back to what life was like now that was so unimaginable for her 21-year-old because the arts were so re-embedded in everyday life and community. And there were all of these really interesting economic models and practices to kind of resource that. And yeah, so she did a beautiful, so she shows her daughter a theatre ticket that cost $140 to see a show. And it's like unimaginable for this 21-year-old in the future that would ever be the way that you would access theatre and the arts, because it's completely different. So that's what we did, and it's in for second review. So hopefully they like the revisions that we made with wonderful help from Jenny. I think that's everything. I hope very happy to share a working draft of it, but very hopefully it will end up in Performance Paradigm, which is a performance studies journal.
Great, thank you, Molly. That's fantastic. So we'll go through Molly and Heather and Catherine, and then we'll look at some questions or observations, responses, etc. So Heather, are you okay to go next?
Sure.
Great.
I pull up my notes.
And I'll time you to the 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to start just talking about some of the people who I've been drawing from, thinking through speculative fiction. And then I have this writing that I did it as a performance with the arts-based research community of practice last year with this mask. And warning, it's really rough and it's actually kind of more dystopian, but I'm trying to pull up the utopian strings. And it's a total rough draft, which makes working with Molly and the arts-based community of practice a nice space to try this out. So yeah, just be patient and hold space for something rough and random here. But I've been thinking a lot. I'm working with speculative fiction, thinking this through in my recent teaching and research. And I'll write these names down. I'll put them in the Google Doc. I'm inspired a lot by the work of Felicia Rose Chavez. She has a book called The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, How to Decolonize the Creative Classroom. And there's some great examples in her book on creative writing about ways to get into the body and to try to learn from ways to get away from what we think sounds like smart or good writing or the recent debates, and to really trust and follow your embodied experiences and to start where you are. And she talks with this as a Latinx creative writing instructor, the importance of really trusting your embodied knowledge. So there's some great examples from dancers and writers. So I find that quite inspiring. And Sarah Truman, who Molly just mentioned, I love their book, Feminist Speculations and the Practice of Research Creation. I just put that on the Google Doc. And I actually worked with them on it was called the Queering the Trail project in Edinburgh. I did a drag king walking tour with my friend there about gentrification, and Sarah Essie was one of the curators. And they write that speculative writing, co-writing, poetry, performance, this is a way to undo canonical knowledges and usher in different worlds. And there's a great quote in this book, quote, an ethical commitment to learning to become affected with speculative writing. So to be moved. And when reading this book, I definitely see affinities here with diverse economies, theory, and practice. And another book that I've been drawing from is Vanessa Mercado de Oliveira's book, A Hospicing Modernity, which there'll be a panel and discussion at Liviana on this book. And she looks to art as a way to decolonizing our work and to really also to learn how to hold space for failure, for glitches, for co-learning, and co-sensing, and also developing capacities as a white settler like myself, developing the capacity to sit with my complicities and to unlearn, and to practice and to try decolonizing work through art. So I find that book really helpful. So this little piece I wrote originally started with working with Ailey Rutherford, who I met through the Community Economies Research Network. She's a feminist artist in Glasgow. And it was a project called Planet Abundance, or it's still a project called Planet Abundance, where different artists and arts practitioners and researchers, we met to talk about a future planet of abundance. So I wrote this kind of rapidly in a hotel room in Edmonton last year, and I made a little outfit out of a garbage bag and taped some banana peels to my head, and I tried to speak back as this rotting garbage pile, trying to figure out her way through the university. And I'll explain to you why where I grew up and where I was working had been on fire that summer, and then there was an atmospheric river and the area flooded. So it's really unsettling trying to write and think about mutual aid and possibilities in writing and research when the city was constantly being evacuated and then flooding. So I wrote this performance for Molly in the arts-based research practice, and I edited it. And I'm not going to wear this now because it's hard to wear, but I have this mask that I made years ago at a clown workshop in Manitoulin Island in Northern Ontario. And I wear this, and I also taped a bunch of garbage to my head, and I was speaking as this garbage pile. So I'll read you some of this if you can time me, because I just took up space with that intro. But yeah, I'd like to keep working on whittling away at this and eventually do some kind of performance piece. So I'm going to put on the garbage pile voice, try to read this too. So, okay. Thank you for gathering and meeting me. Oh, this is a guided meditation, as a garbage pile guided meditation. So, thank you for gathering and meeting with me for this guided meditation. I was a white 50-year-old cisgendered feminist geography professor. I am now a rotting scum pile. I'm like a garbage fish, a carpet fish, a talking garbage blob. I'm presenting from Sinkhole University, perched on a mountain overlooking a beautiful valley in stolen Shequepam land, a territory where indigenous peoples died and survived in residential schools, genocidal practices to clear the land for mining, agriculture, and ongoing real estate ventures. Sinkhole University. Bolstered by petro-capitalist economies, global extraction industries, fracking, open pit mining, pipelines carrying raw bitumen, oil sludge from Alberta tar sands to the Salish Sea. Pipeline-funded Center for Community Engagement and Trauma-Informed Research. Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrested Indigenous land offenders fighting the same pipeline. Impact, knowledge mobilization. Sinkhole University. International students from Zimbabwe, Nigeria, China, and India paid humongous student fees to access the Canadian degree. They arrived to a housing crisis, expensive housing in motels on urban strip malls, modular housing in a parking lot, the same housing that housed oil pipeline workers, knowledge economy, real estate, innovation. Sinkhole University. In 2021, 81 forest fires circled us. Throughout the territory, fires displaced international students, seniors in assisted living, families. Farmers rushed in the middle of the night to move pigs and turkeys. 6 weeks of orange, red, and gray skies, embers in the air, fire retardant washing over the dry mountains. A few months later, heavy rain rushed down across the valley, forecasters calling it an atmospheric river. Mountain slides covered in slick plastic like fire retardant could not absorb the rain. Equipment and infrastructure cracked and twisted, or equipment and infrastructure for oil pipelines cracked and twisted, crunchy oil pretzels on the sides of mountains. Trapped at Sinkhole University. On the day of the atmospheric river, I was walking to the Center for Community Engaged Learning to facilitate a seminar. Sploosh, there I went. Into a parking lot crack. Feminists flushed away by the rushing water. Sploosh. Stumbling under some sludge from a nearby construction site for the university's new condominiums. Trapped under Elsevier journals, construction debris from condos, impact reports, 4-star leadership. Fermenting and metabolizing in the debris hole, slowing down with debris shadows, gooey monsters, medicine and magic. Earthworms nibbling on my messy, blobby tendrils, nibbles of edufactory ruins, movement and metabolizing. I heard from a squirrel in the Walmart parking lot that my ooze nurtured some potatoes that went into the wild salmon caravan, a Shekwepem art gathering celebrating and honoring salmon across the territory. My ooze found its way to an urban farm not far from here, fertilizing arugula, kale, and cabbages. Some of the moms working this garden lost kids in the fentanyl overdose crisis. And my leaky mess nourishes food at meals where local land defenders, water protectors, and allies and students and professors discuss strategies for land back. Radical decolonial economies for wiser, more tender futures. Collective moves away from the doomed and absurd petro-capitalist state. At the meals, we learned from international students about anti-colonial struggles, stories, art, slowing down, listening, difficult work, making mistakes, holding each other with patience, moving forward. Anxieties, something new together. As a blob here in this janky parking lot hole, I let go of my entitlements, my expectations for social mobility, striving for safety in real estate, in hoarding resources, and scarcity politics. Oozing, slowing down, the stuck, the quiet, after the rushing and crashing, time to think, time to stink. Think, stink, and sense something different to grow towards. Wisdom in a monstrous sinkhole. Okay, so that's the Sinkhole University. It needs editing, and it's maybe more dystopian, but I did have a whole section in there about all the coalitional possibilities and things that were happening as well before I fell into the sinkhole. But to make space for this, I cut that out. So it was a more complicated story of the university. So yeah,
That's
thanks
great.
for listening.
No, that's great. And perfectly timed too, Heather. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Awesome.
So thank you for cutting. Kath.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I want to show 2 slides that I used in a talk recently that where I kind of did do a bit of a speculation about something I'd like to see. But before I get onto that, I just, we've just come through this incredible experience in Australia where misinformation has been broadcast on a daily basis by our national broadcaster and everybody, and there's been no real pushback in some ways. And I think, everyone in the States is familiar with this, but this was the first time that we saw this kind of misinformation campaign really gain ground in Australia. And I just read a piece in The Guardian this morning by a guy from this really thoughtful person who does various polling, and he's saying how, because now that we've moved on from bad-mouthing, Indigenous people, now the right wing who are using the Steve Bannon playbook are all just going on about climate change and how, wind farms need to be eliminated because poor whales are going to be affected coming down the coast of Australia. And after never caring about this, suddenly now they're producing all this misinformation now, playing on people's NIMBY kind of feelings. Anyway, he's arguing that in order to step into this, we can't just keep keep sort of giving another fact. We have to be much more careful about constructing visions of what is possible, for communities up on the coast who are going to have a wind farm 20 kilometres away, actually producing it as a story that is something that you would want, but the left and others aren't doing that kind of work. So it seemed to me, what he's saying is we need a form of speculative fabulation for people to imagine how it will be that they will live in a climate changed world in a way that's not going to, have Aboriginal people living in their backyard or a wind farm right in their front door, which is all the kind of fear that keeps getting fear-mongered. So in a way, speculative fabulation is to some extent a counter to misinformation, it seems to me. At least we need to be using it as a tool, I feel like, for a way of countering and giving people something else to hang on to that is based in their reality, that accepts that there are problems, but tries to move them into a direction that says, we can do this, rather than we just have to say no, which is, the refrain of the whole referendum right wing was, if you don't know, vote no. And that was accepted across Australia. A statement of ignorance was embraced, and it was absolutely horrific. So in a way, this kind of session has come at a time when I think there's a lot at stake here. And anyway, that's just one kind of take here. And I guess the thing that I was playing around with in the talk I gave in Korea just recently, and I'll just share the screen if I can on this. Yeah. Guinea? Is that showing it? Yeah. Can everyone see that?
And Kath, just hit 5 and see if you can do it this whole screen. F5.
Control F5?
Or just F5. Or you've got your little laptop keyboard, don't you?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
No, it doesn't matter.
Oh, anyway, at the end of this talk I was giving about the social and solidarity economy, I kind of said, imagine if, because this social and solidarity economy is now being kind of recognized by the United Nations as a kind of a legitimate sphere of economy that's involved in collective interests and so on. And I was saying, well, how does the recognition of something that community economies have been talking about for a long time, how does that move us forward in thinking about transformations that we need to be making at a planetary scale, even to meet the SDGs, for instance? And I kind of said at the end of the talk, wouldn't it be wonderful if instead of every night at the news, we have the finance report? And this is the kind of finance report that comes on every night, with Alan Kohler standing there giving us all these statistics about, disposable income and shares and everything like that. If we were to have a different kind of report on a transformation report where we started to actually look at the kinds of indicators that we see are important for major transformation, for instance, the increase of common wealth, for instance, the growth of the commons, Or if we think about direct needs, the growth of basic assets that are decommodified, that are allowing people to access food and services without having to deal with kind of accumulation strategies and so on. Where the growth of social enterprises and social and solidarity economy enterprises might show that there's more kind of redistributive wealth that's being developed rather than private wealth funds, where social surplus could be growing or so on, and where ecological footprints might be reducing, or where reparation payments could be growing. I mean, these are all our kind of go-to strategies for how we want to see economic change taking place, but we never think about projecting that onto a kind of an economy-wide level or a regional level and saying, well, let's just actually try and, even if we can't do it accurately, kind of sort of speculatively look at what's going on and how it could be growing. And we just heard from Lisa Marie Dakanay yesterday about the incredible growth of social enterprises in the Philippines from was it 20,000 to 100,000 or something in 10 years, which is a kind of growth of a form of what she calls a redistributive economy, for the poor. And the state, the Philippine state, is now sort of going to vote on support for this kind of sector. So it's not beyond imagination that in particular countries, these kinds of indicators can be collected or at least speculated about and so on. So I guess my thought was, would it be kind of interesting for the community economies to come up with some of these kinds of indicators that we think would actually be showing the kind of transformation we need to be making in order to shift economies onto a different standing, and kind of, I mean, even in a comedic way, kind of coming up with reports that would try and do that and make them seem more real for people. Because we do know that in each of these little areas, there is something happening. There are places where ecological footprints are reducing and so on. So it's not like there's nothing there behind this. There's something there. It's obviously not happening at the scale we want it to. But if we were to kind of produce a simple kind of community economies, not finance, but transformation report that we could be kind of acting out or so on, it would be a way of making it seem more real. And I think then also coming up with the stories that, is that gone? I'll stop sharing now. The stories that might allow people to think themselves into situations that they're being scared away from at the moment, which by the kind of misinformation. So that is, and I think I was inspired by Paul Chatterton's last chapter in his book that he's written, where he kind of thinks about his, a child in another generation's time and what the city is like for that child. And he kind of goes through the day of what it's like for living in a livable city where the kid can walk to school and, people can be eating vegetables. And I don't know, it's a very lovely kind of vision of what it could be like in a city. And it seems to me, we could be doing that kind of thing in images and in actions, taking whole bits of Western Sydney and reconfiguring it in a certain way and presenting it. What could it look like? Yeah. I think that's probably enough for me.
Yeah, great. That's fantastic, Kath. So I thought at this point we could just stop and have a 5-minute break and just let, what we've heard from Heather and Molly and Kath sort of, float around in our brains a bit, and then come back and have some discussion, some responses, observations. So yep, so if we take 5 minutes and then let's come back. I think we've got some really rich material and ideas to work with. So it'll just be 2 minutes after the hour, according to my
And perhaps
computer.
we can talk about answer Kerry's question after the 5 minutes as well, because I think that's a really good one to talk about.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, okay, great. And Molly, you said I want to see the slide again. I put in the Google Docs, I put that Kath's business report. Great suit, Kath.
I'm just imagining some sort of performance event with the compost heap and Kath in the suit.
All
Yeah.
right, let's talk in 5 minutes time. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. So we've lost Ethan and Dee, but that's fine.
Where are you now, Molly? You're not in that ivory tower.
I know, I'm outside the ivory tower. I got kicked out because it's exam period and suddenly they needed it. I fear it was an academic integrity issue and they came in to interview a student. So I had to leave and I'm now under a tree, which is very nice.
It's beautiful.
Very nice.
I'm not on my home campus. So I'm sort of hiding out in different corners of the other one.
So we'll just wait a moment for Christian and Kerry. And Yana, are you still awake?
Yeah, well, sort of. Not really sure.
So maybe we could just start with just a quick sort of go round and get a response from everybody to where their thinking is at the moment. And maybe I might just do it by going around my screen. So Rebecca, do you want to just have a response?
I'm sure my response is like more. Kind of really partly finding myself flashbacks to all my Google photos from the forest fires in Chiquapam Territory all summer, where I spend all my time. So there was the garbage university was like, I was feeling it. I'm thinking about the differences between fictionalizing, like where's the speculation and the speculative fiction, in terms of trying to draw in. I think I've just finished a piece that is like set as if it's in the law school lounge, where the whole piece is articulated as a conversation amongst law students. And so at first I was listening and thinking that it's kind of a different thing, not speculative, but actually I'm thinking to myself about these imaginaries of being able to imagine a different kind of, like if we imagine different kinds of law students having different kinds of conversations, if that's still speculative and not only just like conveying information through a dialogue form, right? So it's very, anyways, I'm thinking about that question of what are the speculation parts, what are the performative parts of it. It's great, really interesting presentations.
Right.
It's important, powerful work.
All right, we'll just keep going round. So Molly, have you got any response you want to share?
I like the playful element of this methodology. And so yeah, that was one of my responses, is that it sort of invites play, but it's also like it's serious, like serious play. So it's not, there's a difference to me between I think to do with Carrie's question around, is it misinformation? And I think I disagree, and I'll come back to that. But I think there's something to do with the kind of seriousness of it, or the methodology that differentiates it from misinformation, but that it's still a kind of playful approach. That's what's on my mind.
Great. Christian.
Lots of thoughts. I also appreciate Carrie's question and sort of the question of disinformation. It makes me think about a lot of questions around who the audience is, and if this is a different form of engagement than academics typically are engaged in and or incentivized to do. I think there's a lot of us who are trying to think about like the efficacy of scholarly writing and the limitations of that, and how different forms of communication are necessary in the face of a lot of the challenges. And then the final piece is just as an ethnographer, I was thinking about connections between like some of the critiques and creative things that have been done with ethnography and speculative writing. And I don't have like a profound thought there. I was just like, oh, I'm going to chew on that more, because there might be some things from some of those kinds of writing culture conversations that happened a while back that could be relevant to these conversations too. appreciate what everybody said, though. Thanks.
Thanks, Christian. Jana, are you able to have a response?
I was wondering what kind of methods or creativity techniques you used or we could use to really get like become very radical in thinking and plotting the new, like beyond the dystopian now. How can we get to like really further to new ideas that might, I don't know, entail old ideas too, but combine them with the challenges of the poly-crisis we're facing and stuff, but to get to a positive, to good future designs and stuff.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Kerry.
I have disorganized thoughts, but one thing I'm trying to articulate something that I'm kind of, it's on the edge of my mind or something. There's something about, I was thinking as you're talking about, I liked, Heather, that you mentioned this ethical commitment to being affected by speculative fiction. And I was thinking about how speculative fiction is productive or generative, how it becomes actualized, I suppose, or like what are the kind of pathways to achieving that, if it's something that wants to be achieved, of course. Like how do you take something that's speculative and people say, well, that's actually quite cool, we could work with some of those things and put it into practice, I suppose. And there might be examples of that people have of actually happening, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kerry. Heather, a response, and you don't have to answer Kerry's question, just a response at this point.
I can post, there's I'll have to look it up. There's a group, again, this yeah, it's a Sensing Decolonial Futures project, and they use speculative fiction and art to come up with different ways of thinking about this, and they create these wonderful worksheets and like these wonderful cards, almost like tarot cards and worksheets and writing prompts, and the people involved in it do projects around housing, addressing the opioid crisis. Like some of them are practitioners in health and art. So I think, but it's working collectively using speculative art, and then, but yeah, finding pathways. And what I find really lovely about this work for me is thinking through working with Indigenous students and the artists I've been working with. I love that it holds space for working with not knowing and not being really good at it, and undoing mastery, and kind of making space for this difficult work, because I get frustrated when I read work that looks too like this modernist project of being really an expert at something and then distilling it down to this 4-star article, or like this thing that you're like a leader on something. I love the way this work is about the awkwardness of the process, but seeing it then in these art projects. I'll post the site for that. It's quite lovely work, but there's something about the process of it. And I think for facilitation, like just this morning, I met with, I went on my union's equity, diversity, and inclusion committee, and our HR and our department, they're hiring an equity diversity expert. However, our Indigenous and Black and scholars of color, there's been a lot of anti-Indigenous and anti-Black racism in our university. So we're trying to turn to some of these methods and models for really holding really difficult conversations, because it's very real, very material when you have people coming and talking this language, and then there's systemic barriers to underrepresented colleagues. So for me, that's a really good place for some of these methods. Holding space for these discussions and learning to sit with and kind of developing our capacities to have these difficult conversations. And I'm finding art and the work coming from people that mobilize these art practices, I'm finding them really good tools for having these discussions. Today, I was so nervous. It was 8:30 in the morning and I felt like I was talking in circles about it. But this woman from HR is like, this is amazing. I'm like, oh, really? Because it makes me nervous that it's all over the place. But she was like, no, we need to learn to sit with each other. I hope that makes sense. But there's just like all this like equity, diversity, inclusion, indigenizing. And then the radical Indigenous colleagues I work with critique that. And then one of them now is under investigation for harassment for critiquing the policy. So it's like learning the capacities for difficult discussions around this. So anyways, that's my long answer with that. But I've been finding the writing coming from Black and Indigenous art practice really lovely at showing how difficult this work is. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Kath?
Yeah, I think what comes through to me is diversifying the ways in which we can learn to be affected. Like we've talked about learning to be affected a lot in our work in the past. And I guess, the thing that most confronted me about this referendum issue in Australia is the fact that 60% of Australians refuse to be affected by Indigenous issues. And the 60% were largely people without tertiary education. I mean, that was the one thing. And the other thing was people who are no longer connected to organisations. They're not parts of unions. They're not in clubs. They're lonely in some way. And I think that to me, action research is, starting with people where they're at in all sorts of ways. And it's always appealed to me that it's a way of getting people to learn to start to be affected by each other and by the situation they're in. And we've used a lot of, sort of arts-based techniques and so on. But it does seem like I feel like there's a need for a greater range of techniques and doing artistic practices, doing role-playing, doing comedian kind of stuff seems to be much more of to me, something that's going to help people imagine themselves into a different place rather than, more academic articles or whatever, or even more highbrow fiction. Like, you think about the 38% who voted yes in this thing, they're all people that would read Black speculative fiction that kind of, there's a lot of Indigenous writers now writing about this stuff. It's just that there's the rest is just not being touched by any of this stuff. And so how do we have that kind of, how would we be part of that place where those kinds of other kinds of things could start happening? And it seems to me, through pub talks and I don't know, all this kind of stuff is really where that kind of other form of cultural civics education kind of thing really has to happen. And it seems like we've got an in into this through the kind of action research interests we've had and the kind of more ethnographic like reflections back to people of what they know in their own contexts and all this kind of stuff. And we really need to be mobilizing it, I feel like now. And playfulness is really important, though. I mean, I think that whole not pushing expert knowledge on people, that's exactly what people reacted against in this whole thing in Australia. I mean, it's been very insightful in a way, that I think what's just happened for us. And there's a lot more thinking to be done about it, but it's also incredibly scary as how easily people have been able to be caught up in misinformation, which it is a form of speculative fiction, that misinformation, I think. I don't know. I mean, I don't know really whether I want to be bothered with all the kind of fine tuning of definitions here, but it's certainly on what I would consider the wrong side of history, that's for sure. But I mean, people kept saying, oh, Australians are generous, and they're not, like, oh, people like want to do the right thing. They don't, I mean, in certain contexts they do, when they can make a connection with somebody. But in general, most Australians did not know the 3% of people who are Indigenous. And so they had no way of being affected by this situation. And I think that's the challenge for us. Like, I mean, that these kinds of techniques, I think, are ways of doing that. I'd love to see us do more on this kind of area. Yeah.
I'd like to add to that I did a project with these two Indigenous comedians I work with. We did a thing for this art festival in June. And we were all in character. And one of the guys I work with, he has a character named Donnie Dreamcatcher. And he's an Indigenous man, real estate developer, trying to get people to move into toilets now is the new porta potties, the new tiny home. This because the cost of housing here is some of the most expensive in the world. And the current mayor is spending so much money on police to take unhoused people's stuff and just move them along. And there's so much violent policing. But Donnie Dreamcatcher and this other character named Skus, who's this Instagram influencer, and they sell pond scum in bottles. And then my character, who's like an expert on Indigenous real estate developers, and I keep drinking all their pond scum. So the three of us are wandering around. We had a toilet porta potty planning workshop. We had all these cutout porta potties and then all these images, and people after our presentation, which looked like this really weird TED talk, people then could make their own porta potty home. And once you buy a porta potty, you're part of Porta Potty Futures. It's called Honey Bucket Futures. And where you buy into all these military contractors and companies and cat pharmaceuticals. Like we sat here improvising in my room, just writing the weirdest. You get this whole stock portfolio, but people made all these nutty collages. And this one is a multiple porta potty home with women wrestlers on top and a band coming out of the side. But we had all this information about the amount of money now to put police in high schools, to police people. And Donnie Dreamcatcher kept going, you can see it in a negative way, but take it a step further. If you go with Honey Bucket Futures, you can have your own military to protect your multi-porta potty home. And it just got weirder and weirder. But then people were making all these nut bar things where there were fighter jets and mycelium. And we all had like these wacky. So I kept the whole folder of but it was like people were in character just showing how terrible and ridiculous it's getting, but then it just got weirder and weirder. So there are all these towers of porta potties connected with tubes, and but it was just taking the reality of the ridiculousness of the housing crisis and then having this over the top Indigenous property developer covered in dream catchers yelling about, well, we're one step ahead. And it was just like, what? They had porta potty toilet drinks. It was blue Gatorade, and my character was drinking. He's like, this is world leading, and I was trying to sell it. So we want to we'd like to have this, but then have all kinds of materials on access to programs stuff. And we also had stuff on the Vancouver Tenants Union, and we're trying to use it as a way to usher in knowledge around where to access radical housing groups. But it was I've been asking people at the Revolver Theater Festival after, is that really too dark or weird? They're like, no, it was just really fun to laugh at how like a 1-bedroom basement suite goes for $2,000 now. No one can afford it. Like, and the cops policing the streets. And so it felt like a way, it was one sliver of a way to try to amplify and draw attention to the absurdity of what's happening. It's almost like a circus in a way. So to turn it around. So yeah, the porta potty
push everything to its extreme in that kind of surreal way and get people involved in that. I think it definitely would. It's a form of shocking. It's and sort of fun, but also shock. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me touch base with what people would like to do, because we could do a little bit more discussion, or we could do some brainstorming about things that we might like to do, and even brainstorming. Jana mentioned methods, like even brainstorming some of the the methods, like Heather was mentioning, sort of exaggeration and taking things to the extreme, and circus and so on. And then it would be great if we could do something, but I thought maybe just some brainstorming about what we might do would be a way to go. So do people want to have a go at doing that? Or do people want to talk more?
Were you thinking brainstorming on the Google Docs?
Yeah,
Or-
yeah. So I thought we could just spend 5 minutes just, writing down thoughts about what might be possible, and, like, let's speculate on what some speculative fabulation, speculative writing might be, and then we could just have a look at what we come up with. How's that sound? Yep, because I think there's lots of ideas here. And is everyone happy if we still have this being recorded and shared? Yep. Okay. Okay, great. So
One other, sorry, I had one other, just to get my own thought clear on this.
Yep.
It feels like there's, I like the methodology question, and I've also have in my mind, like, the differences between the work of trying to draw speculative fiction as a method for students in the classroom for like ways that it could be drawn into pedagogy versus ways it gets drawn into our own teaching and into our own research, not the teaching side,
Yep.
but and I appreciated hearing about kind of the community-based pieces of it, but just in my head, I'm still trying to sort out some of the differences between things that can be drawn in depending on kind of that piece of the,
I've
world
put in
stuff.
Sorry, Rebecca. I put in a couple of readings in the Google Doc that are about pedagogical uses specifically. I have not used it in an undergraduate context, but with honours students in their who have to write quite a short dissertation at our university, and it's often doesn't give them an opportunity to do something empirical. Used speculative fiction as a method, so they're often, say for example, I had a student who was interested in how disability studies ideas and disability arts practice could inform what a primary teacher might do, and then she could create a kind of speculative case study to show what that would look like in practice, in her practice or someone else's practice. So it sort of became a tool at that sort of level, because she was at a level she could read Haraway and some of the other ideas behind the method. So that's the only example I can think of where I've used it in teaching so far.
Great. So if you go down to page 5 of the document, there's a little heading that says, on this page, please brainstorm your ideas for what you'd like to write about, or methods, speculate on your potential speculative writing. So why don't we just do some silent writing for 5 minutes? Yep, thank you. We're probably at that 5 minutes. So do we want to just spend a couple of minutes just reading through what everyone's written? I think we could just do that as silent reading. Mm. Thoughts? Heather, I realise I'm really interested to know how you wrote the compost piece. Did you sit down and write it as a sort of stream of consciousness, or like what sort of where did you go in your head?
I keep turning the mic on and off. Yeah, that was stream of conscious. Yeah, I wrote it stream of conscious in the hotel room in Edmonton. But yeah. And then and I wrote it again for us for the reading group. But yeah, it was a stream of consciousness. But that was like Rebecca was saying, it was just nuts. Like there were the air was, well, you had forest fires where you are, but it went on for weeks and weeks that year. So it was a lot of just digging into that. And then the two people I do research and art work with, like we couldn't even see each other because the highway was chopped up in 20 pieces from the atmospheric river. So I dug into that.
Yeah.
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 But I love the idea of again with that book, Hospicing Modernity, and then this sensing decolonial futures. There's some really cool writing prompts and in activities to reflect on. I'm finding books that have things like that really, really helpful for thinking through these concepts. I'm in a reading decolonial research cluster, and we're reading it really slowly, and we're reading the prompts, and we're responding when we meet once a month with notes, but also we do an art practice each month. So last month, each of us made a bingo card of how we embody colonial thinking, and how so like our responses in our bodies. And then we made a bingo dabber troll doll. We actually go and make things. So it's really fun because we're all academics, so we're having to run off, and then we had to film each other 1 month doing some kind of movement activity, trying to make sense of the chapter. So having an activity and as well as discussing it, and it's been a really wonderful kind of unfolding, and very awkward and great watch, but trying to get out, like the book talks about that, like trying to think coherently and have mastery around these concepts to try to undo that. And so I'm finding projects that give you these prompts and tools I'm really hoping to work towards more in my practice.
Yeah.
Rebecca,
Thanks.
you had your students making games at one point, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. So I put a link into a blog post that just kind of that curated a bunch of things. So in the classroom, we've got a longer history of people doing project-based work with the students that is designed specifically to get at this affective embodied stuff. But then one of the challenges is the amplification question, like people do things, but then how to connect it into that larger conversation where people can be affected or impacted or influenced by the other people's work. Anyways, I just have popped that up there. But so yeah, the students are doing a lot of individual things like speculation, films, screenplays, board games, installation art, beading projects, all sorts of pieces of the thing. So like in the classroom, it seems possible to do that without shame or fear or worry, like within that pedagogical context. But then it's also how to push that out as they become lawyers in the world. So where does that go when there's these other kind of external pressures? So it's one of the questions that's circling around for me, which is like the public conversations of the kind that you're talking about, Kath, in like why it's not, if you don't know, say yes, like how to change people's to not be fear and famine focused in our visions of the world, but like generosity, hospitality, openness, abundance thinking. Like it's just such a great question. Anyways, for this one, for me, since you're all here and we're still in this space and I'll colonize it, but also trying to think about how to push against the notion that some of those tools aren't present already in our inherited tools. So I'm trying to think about how to not allow the current narratives to presume that, for example, law has always been a terrible thing, or that relations in the past have always been like that it's always been this way. So I think I'm thinking about like the speculation forward, but also like the amplification back, and how is that also speculative, or is that just historical, or how do we tell those stories to make them as gripping and compelling to let people see that it's not just like alternatives in the present, but reinscribing the past. I'm just, my PhD supervisor, it's his, like the Festschrift thing, but he wrote this book, The Legal Imagination, in 1973. So I've been, and it's now the 50th anniversary, but just thinking about like how to, I'm really, so I'm trying to think, do I write in a speculative way for that Festschrift piece about what speculation, like, yeah, how to think about, the end. Thanks for letting me blather on and
No,
write some notes for you guys.
Oh no, all I was thinking was, Rebecca, was I'm so pleased this is being recorded, because there's fabulous stuff to go back and re-listen to in terms of what you've just said and what other people have said as well.
I mean, it just occurs to me around the past. I mean, at the moment, the thing that the thing that was supposed to be the next thing was truth telling in Australia. And, there's been very little of that for most wider settled Australians. Very little about the actual conditions, of colonization and so on. And so various people are publishing books. One, David Mars, a very well-known journalist, who just put a whole book out where he just went and researched his own relation, who was a member of the native police and involved in huge massacres, that were never written up or anything like that. And that's finally coming out. But I'm just thinking that there could be also that's retrospective speculative fiction, where you think of how things could have been different, where you actually do that history, knowing the history, but then saying, and what steps could have been taken, and doing a different one. And that could be very useful, I think, in this context anyway.
Kath, there's the book by, his name just escapes me, who was it, James Cook, who was a mate of Eddie Mabo, but he's from Tasmania.
Henry
Yeah, and
Reynolds.
so he wrote a book ages ago called This Whispering in Our Hearts, in which he goes and sort of rereads the story of early colonial, police and so on, but where people knew things weren't right, and that, but was this sort of whispering in the heart that it is, in a way, I mean, even though he's writing it as a historian, is sort of, the underlying agenda is, well, what would have happened if we had have listened to the whispering in our hearts, that sense of disease, what if that had been the thing that we worked with.
Yeah, I think there's like the creative writing device of like imagining if a different event had happened in history, or things had gone differently, how would the future look differently, that enables us. And then there's this sense of our idea of how history went shapes how we imagine what the future is going to be. And so knowing the kind of revisionist, or the more stories from history, the ones that haven't dominated, then enable us to imagine a richer range of future possibilities. And put that in the Google Doc. In the context of education, we're looking at this kind of 4-week really radical experiment with education during the war here in Palmerston North, as a way to help us to learn from that and reimagine how we might think about education in current states of crisis. And it had this, incredibly progressive, ecological. It was just this amazing thing, but nobody remembers it. It's almost entirely forgotten. But and so when we think about what we could do in the future, if we don't remember that, then we think that kind of thing would be impossible. But they did it, in 1942, and it was amazing.
It reminds me of that wonderful work of Dolores Hayden, all those wonderful feminist experiments in living differently and kitchenless houses and all that kind of stuff, which again is such an inspiration for thinking differently about now, but how important it was for her to do that historical work. So what you're pointing out is so many more options and opportunities to do that kind of work. Yeah. Really interesting. Gosh, if only we had lots of money and we could just spend all the time doing this kind of stuff. It would be so much fun. Oh, wait a minute, I'm retiring. Maybe I can.
Yeah. So does anyone else want to say something based on what we've been writing or talking about? Yeah, Kerry.
I just keep thinking about people talking about the audience of speculative fiction, I suppose, and how you might access different diverse audiences, I suppose. I noted in there someone writing about not speaking to the choir, and I don't want to do it, but I've got like this idea. I've always had this idea in my head from my time as an activist as well, that it's all about, in Australian context, it's all about football. Like that's the place, that's the hook for people. You know, this year there was 1 in 21 Australians are a member of an AFL football club, and that's not to mention rugby or whatever. That's a lot of people, and that's paid up members. So you can times that by a lot more of people that are actually interested in the game and going to the game. Maybe an unfair generalization, but I'm putting out there that it probably also, you know, has a lot of people that might not be engaged in speculative fiction, might not be engaged in the arts, in performance, in theatre, in all that kind of stuff. Is it fair to say probably a lot of people that might have voted no in the referendum, Catherine? Maybe, I feel like it is, but maybe it's
Well,
not.
I mean, that was the debate, because all the codes came out in support of yes, but they didn't do a thing to talk to their leadership about it.
That's right. So I think it's massive. And I think, well, how do you do that? Do you tell stories that are relevant to the things that people are interested in? Football? Is there like this future where all of a sudden these football players realize that they're going to not have a career anymore because it's going to be 45 degrees and they won't be able to play the game, so they become radical climate activists? Probably not. Or are you inserting more theatre into events? Like in AFL Grand Final, it's the standard stuff. It's like just music. Oh, we've got a rock band, which is good. That's fine. But like, what if you start having different kinds of performances that people might kind of enjoy, that they might have not have access to? Because I'm also thinking that with theatre and maybe even comedy and stuff like that, I don't think that that's, you made the point, Molly, at the very beginning about the $140 tickets to a performance. Like, they're not really accessible. And I'm thinking back to my suburban youth here in Melbourne with, you know, in the family whose father was a bricklayer and played football and was around that kind of culture. I think it's like unsettling almost, like to be in a space that would be about theatre or about performance. Or, you know, the people might think, oh, this is a bit strange, it's not really for me. So not only how do you get people like to take on messages from these different kinds of speculative performances and fictions, but also how do you get people to feel like that it's something that they can engage with as well, I suppose. I'm not sure, but it's just a thought that I've been having. Anyway.
Great, thanks. So we're definitely not going to get time to do any speculative writing, which is fine. But I wonder just, you know, whether people have got thoughts about what they're interested in doing next in terms of thinking about this, you know, like concretely, you know, what, for instance, Rebecca, might you do in your teaching, or, you know. So maybe we could do that as a way of having a wrap. And I just let everyone know that Molly's battery might fade on her. So maybe, Molly, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, so I am literally going to go in and carry on making this speculative work about how an urban community lives with its river, which is really about looking at the past to kind of imagine or invite people to imagine what it might be. So I'm making a performance work about that for next year in Hamilton.
Great.
Jenny. So yes, that's what I'm going to do. But I think this has all really just been so useful for thinking about that. So thank you. And yeah, would love to have more collective opportunities for writing maybe in the future.
Yep.
Would be great.
Yep.
Or making.
Yep. So someone else who wants to jump in.
I mean,
yeah,
you know, if people are interested in just pursuing it more, thinking and writing more freely and sharing it, that what they're doing or thinking about, you know, I think potentially putting it out there as a strategy could be a useful thing in a small collection, you know. I don't know, further down the track. I don't want to, you know, get people harnessed into more jobs or anything, but if we were able to do some writing around this topic and do the speculative or talk about them as a method, I could imagine there being a pretty interesting collection of pieces that we could put together. And it would reflect, you know, aspects of community economies work, but just taken in all sorts of different directions. And I'm sure our book series would be interested in something like that. But it's more of a long-term thing. But maybe we just need to encourage each other to do the work, the writing and sharing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess from my perspective, I'm trying to think about the amplification question that you were asking and trying to figure out sometimes when is it the case that we're already doing those things, but looking as if it's somewhere else other than where we're going, and then not talking more with other people about what's already happening, about how much stuff is going on. So what I have in my mind for kind of like this project that I'm trying to do now is wondering if I'll figure out how to shape it, but maybe my goal is to act, because in some ways, I don't know if everyone knows, but we have the first Indigenous law, common law degree in the world, and we have graduated 2 cohorts of students already. So it's completely fantastical in some ways, and it's not shifting the world in some ways. It's just what it is, but maybe it's enough to also just be doing some storytelling to say that possibility has happened and it's still a work in progress. And I need kind of like all of the things you guys are doing to think for next semester as well about how to teach in a way that is two things, not one thing, and not a homogenized thing. But anyways, I was just like, yeah, so I think my 10-day project is to try and write in a way that turns something from being speculation into being factual and existing. And then I really want to draw in from you guys these imaginaries of how that might come into the classroom in really concrete ways for the football team, right? For the next semester, the porta potty team. I want those porta potties in my classroom.
Right. Someone else.
I put, Rebecca, you might already know of it, the Wild Salmon Caravan. I put it on the list. That's up in
territory as well.
Yeah. Do you know that? As I check up it's Chase, it's all through Kamloops, but it's a huge, and that's
where they've been carrying that, like lifting the salmon across because of the water.
No, it's a huge community art project, and it's not, it's farmers and small towns and all kinds. It's Indigenous led community art, drawing attention to the salmon. And in all these different towns, there's these wonderful parades and all different ages and people with like salmon on bikes and all, but it's incredible. And I think there are ways to make art. And I'm saying this as someone who is very bitter around urban art people. Usually I'm trying to let go of it. I'm 50 now, but because I didn't grow up around it. And I'm like, you and your fancy art degree. Like I always feel like, and so I came into this stuff later in life because I just didn't have access to it. So now I'm trying to make the work that teenage Heather would have loved to have had in Kamloops. It's like, but there's more and more awesome stuff happening in smaller places for sure, and you see it. But Wild Salmon Caravan, I think, is really it draws all kinds of farmers and fisher people, and it's really great. And they're beautiful parades because we have some of the biggest salmon runs in the world with pipelines being built right under where they spawn, and so it's a beautiful example. So I put it on here. I love the idea of also what Kath was, and we've talked about thinking that we're all going to make it, and climate change is not a problem, and we're just going to keep making our money and developing. That's the type of speculative fiction. I love playing with that and turning that on its head. Like the football players are going to keep winning in the 50 degrees, and the houses are going to get bigger, and like what the hell? Like, so I think we could do some really fun news stories with this, or I don't know what, puppet shows, or there's that. And then the idea also, Rebecca, you're saying amplifying this. There's always been really amazing alternatives all over, and people have found ways. There's all kind of decolonial and really radical alternatives, ways of existing have also need to be amplified. So it's not always something new and in the future, but something but the dominant mainstream stories are the ones that take up the space. But how do we do that story of looking back, amplifying? But the ridiculousness of Yeah, so the toilet porta potty thing, I don't want to get caught in this spiraling. Actually, it's weird. I saw John Waters talk last night, the king of disgusting movies. And he so it's funny because he's made his whole life making gross movies, but it's shock and awe. But that, like, you can have that, but then also to look at generative alternatives and with this research point to past and future types of housing that aren't this ridiculous and policing each other. And so I'm thinking of, yeah, like the role of abject, gross, clownish stuff, but then opening up other things too, because you don't want to just shock and then shut down. And so yeah, I'm thinking about that, talking to all of
I
you.
feel like the porta potties and the bamboo bridge need to come together at some point.
No. That's true. But yeah, these
Kath is
different-
referencing a bamboo bridge film that she was involved in making.
yeah.
Jana, do you want to say anything in closing?
We're going to launch like on Thursday, Friday, a very small brochure book about future village in 2035 to village people, like the people who live in villages, who are active in villages and rural planning, regional planning, development and stuff. And I'm just, I don't know, I'm bit scared, but also very curious how people are reacting to it and how we can actually come up with a format to discuss our utopian thinking about a good future in those villages with people who are actually living there, so to say.
Right.
So it's
No.
like this way of like engaging with not the football players, but the villagers, other people where they live.
So did you put the book in what you put in the Google Docs?
It's German only.
Ah, okay.
I mean, if you can read German, I can put it there.
Well, put it up there. Put it up there anyway. Yeah. Yeah.
Has it got pictures?
Yes.
Diagrams?
Oh,
It's
that's
a really great picture. I could actually, if you,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
could share a slide if I can.
Please.
And I know I realize we're at time, so if anyone needs to duck away, that's yeah. Do you want to, Kerry, before you go, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing. It was really interesting, and it was useful for getting me thinking about how speculative fiction might be used in some things I'm interested in. And one way I thought is I've started beginning a project, let's see how far it goes, about making homes on the Merry. When Merry is the creek near where I live. And it's basically based on this it's based on this idea about how as you said, Catherine, before, how you could be affected in diverse ways by a creek, right? And I was starting with soundscapes and how that might make people connect or be affected by that river. And I've just, from this session, I thought maybe there could be some kind of writing around that as well. It's another way that people might be affected by the creek, I suppose. So thanks.
Great. Christian, did you have to duck away? Oh, wow. Jana, we'll have to make sure we share this with Catherine Bohm from My Villages.
This is the cover of the little book, and this is a collection of all the little drawings in the book, where you can see all like where are the fields of action, like education, working, health, generations, energy, mobility, construction, agriculture, etc. pp. So we got all these little drawings.
That's fantastic. Oh, I love the one in the bottom right.
Bottom right. This
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just looking at all the
it's
houses.
about rebuilding, reconstructing, not building anew, but using the old houses and buildings and infrastructure to live more sufficiently.
Be great to have a news item where you could do a bit of it. Maybe Catherine could help with some translation or something.
Yeah.
Just get the story of what it's about, because there are people in the network that are German speakers, aren't they?
Yeah.
And it's degrowth and community economies inspired or aligned.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Great.
Right. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for letting me show it.
So now we'll be in touch about that. That's wonderful. Christian, you want to say anything?
I appreciate all this. I still have ideas bubbling in my head that I will put in the Google document, because as everybody was talking, I was thinking about, I'll add this, but this book that I read called Death by Landscape, that it's a bunch of essays about sort of speculative fiction as appropriate to climate futures, but it's also got these chapters about live action role playing, which as everybody was talking, I was thinking it'd be great to organize something at a conference where you actually have people do live action role playing and inhabiting different roles and different identities, and just kind of thinking about that whole set of possibilities for this kind of genre as a way to really engage people. So long way of saying I appreciate the generativity of this, and ideas are going to keep popping off, and I'll just add them to the Google Doc and to the notes.
Yeah. Right. It can live on.
Yeah.
Well, I want to write a CE news story about this, because I'm going to write them about, some of the sessions, and that's going to give me a chance to process, because, I've just got, ideas swirling around in my head and I don't know what I think. So doing, writing is one way that I think through writing. So I'm really looking forward to writing something about what we've talked about, which will mean that I'll re-listen to the video and so on, the Zoom recording, which we've kept recording to the end, and I think that's completely appropriate. So thank you, everybody. It's been wonderful.
For organising.
Yeah, thanks for your work together.
Great.
And really
Thank
lovely
you so much.
to hang out with you West Coastery type people up there.
Yeah.
Likewise.
And Berlin people.
Yeah.
I'm now going to think of you, Catherine, as like, have defibrillator will travel.
Exactly. I guess this cyborg. Give me a while. I'll wait for a bit though.
Well, I'm just going to go out and get my own now, so I can be part of
it.
All right. Well, everyone have a great rest of the day, and Jana, have a great sleep. Thank you for staying up.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Yeah. Wonderful to have you there. Yeah. All right. See you later.